Why was everyone staring at her like she didn't belong? The transport truck's engine rumbled to silence, and for a moment the air around Fort was still, almost reverent. Dust swirled in the crisp autumn morning as boots hit the gravel, one after another, until 24 recruits stood lined up in uneven ranks. Most were men, broad-shouldered, loud, already pairing off into instant alliances. Hunting stories, competition wins, unit transfers. Voices layered over each other like they were already proving something before a single test had begun. She didn't add her voice to theirs. Set her duffel down with quiet precision, cap pulled low to shadow her eyes. Her silence wasn't shyness, not exactly. It was armor. Armor she'd worn for years. Armor that had become second nature in places like this, where a glance carried more weight than words. She felt the glances now, 23 pairs of them, measuring her, dismissing her, some smirking, others just curious, as though wondering what bureaucratic misstep had placed her in their company. They expected her to fail before the first test was even called. And maybe she let them think that. The heavy doors of the administration building banged open, cutting short the low chatter. Out strode Sergeant Blackwood, clipboard tucked under one arm, his face a hard slab of lines carved by years of disdain more than years of service. He stopped in front of them, arms crossed, boots planted wide like the gravel belonged to him. His gaze scanned the group the way a hawk scans a field, searching for weakness, ready to strike at the first sign of it. When his eyes landed on her, the scrutiny was different, longer, sharper. "Listen up." His voice cracked through the air like a whip. "Half of you won't make it past week 1. Another quarter will be gone by week 3. If you're still standing by the end, maybe you'll earn the right to call yourselves snipers." His tone made the word sound sacred, untouchable. He let the pause hang before he added, "This program doesn't bend. It doesn't lower. It doesn't accommodate." His eyes locked on, a deliberate public burn. "If you came here expecting special treatment, you won't last until Friday." A few of the men nodded, almost smug. One or two even shot her sidelong grins, as if the sergeant had spoken their thoughts out loud. Didn't flinch. Her expression remained neutral, every muscle still. Inside, though, she felt the familiar pulse, half heat, half ice. She lived through this before. The judgment, the assumptions, the small, satisfied smiles of men who believed biology was destiny. And she knew what none of them did. "Fall in," Blackwood barked, and the recruits scrambled into lines. The first test came quickly. No ceremony, no warm-up. Their rifles awaited them at steel tables, bolts locked open, barrels gleaming in the angled light. Blackwood's voice carried over the metallic scrape of chairs. "Field strip, clean, and reassemble. You've got 4 minutes." Metal clattered, oil rags unfurled, springs snapped loose. Hands moved differently. Not frantic, not rushed. Her fingers knew the weapon like an old piano, each motion precise, every piece flowing into the next without hesitation. While others glanced around, second-guessing themselves, she simply moved. No wasted effort, no wasted breath. Someone noticed. Lieutenant, lean and watchful at the edge of the range, his tablet glowing faintly in the early light. His pen scratched across the screen each time her hands found their rhythm again. Blackwood's boots approached. She felt his shadow before his voice. "Military issue only in my program. No custom toys, no shortcuts." Her hands didn't stop moving. "Standard issue, sir." He leaned in, eyes narrowing over the weapon, searching for something wrong, anything wrong. "Trigger feels light." "5 pounds 4 ounces, sir. Regulation." The corner of his jaw tightened, irritation flickering like a match that wouldn't quite catch. "Proceed." Across the tables, Talon, hair buzzed close, jaw like granite, chest puffed as though rank came by posture alone, watched the exchange with open interest. He finished his own rifle and leaned back, arms crossed, grin tugging at one corner of his mouth. The test ended with the metallic snap of bolts sliding into place. Blackwood tallied notes with exaggerated care, then led them toward barracks assignments. Name after name rattled from his clipboard, each recruit slotted into neat rooms until hers. He said, glancing up with a smirk, "End of the wing, furthest walk to facilities, limited accommodations, hope you don't mind." His face didn't move. "No issue, sir." Later, when she pushed open the door of her assigned quarters, the room was as he'd promised, bare, tucked away, almost an afterthought. She set her duffel down, opened it carefully, and from within a padded case a photograph. Worn edges, faded colors. She studied it for a long beat, then placed it face down on the nightstand. A knock came. She opened the door to find Lieutenant leaning on the frame. His eyes scanned the room, then her expression, settling in. "Yes, sir." He nodded once. "Reviewed your entrance scores, impressive, especially long range under stress." She inclined her head. "Thank you, sir. You're aware no female has completed this course in 8 years." Her gaze didn't waver. "Yes, sir, I'm aware." Something unreadable flickered across his features. "Good." And then he left, footsteps fading down the hall. The murmurs started that night in the mess hall. They always did. Recruits clustered at tables, voices dropping when she approached. Laughter rose, cutting just enough to carry. Couldn't handle the stress test at Bennying. Had to be extracted crying. "I'll weed her out before the week's done." Sat alone, tray-centered, movements methodical. She read course materials while the laughter circled behind her. It wasn't new. None of it was new. A tray clattered down across from her, startling her slightly. A dark-haired recruit with tired eyes and a badge that read extended a hand. "Figured you might want company that isn't a pack of assholes." Studied him, not worried about guilt by association. He shrugged. "My sister's a medic in the 10th Mountain, tougher than anyone I know. I'll reserve judgment." Something in her chest loosened a fraction. She gave a small nod. Before the conversation could go further, Blackwood entered. Silence snapped across the hall. "Tomorrow, 0500, full gear, 10-mile hike, then range qualification." His eyes found her again. "Sleep well." That night, lying on the thin mattress, stared at the ceiling. The words echoed. 8 years. No female has completed the course. She knew what they expected. She knew the obstacles weren't just physical. They were standing there in the room with her every day, in every laugh, every glance, every smirk. A memory surfaced, unbidden. A voice. A hand on her shoulder once, long ago. "Show them nothing until it's time." Her breath steadied, her jaw set. The morning came cold and sharp. Fog clung to the ground as 24 recruits shouldered 60-pound packs. Boots crunched gravel in formation. Blackwood paced the line, watching, waiting for cracks. The hike broke them quickly. By mile 5, 3 recruits faltered, their breath ragged, faces flushed with strain. Shorter frame worked methodically, one step after the other, breath measured, legs burning. She stayed mid-pack, refusing to be baited by Talon's frequent glances back, waiting for her to stumble. At a steep incline, Blackwood appeared beside her, struggling. "No, sir," she said evenly, though fire burned through her thighs. "This terrain's nothing. Wait until it's mountain passes with spotter scopes and precision rifles. Different game entirely." "Looking forward to it, sir." Her calm inflection cut sharper than a grin. His eyes narrowed before he moved ahead. By the time they reached the range, only 21 remained. Was not among the fallen. She knelt in the wet grass, rifle steady, breath slow. The target stretched before them, 300, 500, 800 meters. Baseline qualifications. Numbers on paper to most. For her, they were something else. A line she would not cross backward. His clipboard glinted in the gray light. Blackwood's voice cracked across the firing line. "Commence fire." The rifles thundered as one. Her grouping held tight. Not first, not worst, fifth, enough to be noted, enough to stay. Enough for now. And yet when she rose, collecting her gear, the laughter still hung in the air, still sharp, still certain. They didn't know her. Not yet. But they would. Why did the rain always seem heavier when doubt lingered? By week 2, the skis above Fort had turned a permanent shade of slate. Cold sheets of rain lashed the training fields, turning every obstacle into a test twice as cruel. The instructors called it an opportunity. The recruits called it something else under their breath. Just called it familiar. The obstacle course stretched ahead of them, mud sucking at boots, water flooding trenches, barbed wire sagging under the weight of rain. Each recruit carried a 30-pound sandbag in addition to their field gear, dead weight meant to simulate equipment loads. Blackwood's voice carried across the storm, "Begin." Threw herself into the mud, body pressed low as she crawled beneath the wire. Mud caked her uniform, rain poured into her eyes, and the sandbag dragged like an anchor. She grit her teeth and pulled. By the time she stumbled across the finish line, chest heaving, her arms trembled with exhaustion. She knew she was slower. She could feel it. Blackwood's stopwatch confirmed it. Minute 17 slower than, he announced, just loud enough for the group to hear. In combat, that's an eternity, barely scraping by. Straightened, forcing her breath into control. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. But the whispering around her said everything. Barely struggling, weak. She felt it dig into her ribs like a blade. The rain didn't let up when they moved to the long-range firing range. Wind flags whipped violently, gusts shifting with every heartbeat. Blackwood's smirk deepened as he spoke. 5 shots, 400 through 800 meters. Miss 2, remedial training. Miss 3, consider packing your gear. The others muttered, more glances, more weight pressing on her shoulders. Talon took his shots clean, his rounds finding steel with confidence that turned into a cocky grin. Struggled, missing at 700, but he recovered, shaking his head as he walked back. Then it was her turn. Lay prone, the earth cold beneath her, her rifle aligned. She breathed in slow, trying to center herself. And then Blackwood stepped close, closer than he had with anyone else. His shadow fell across her scope. Adjust your stance, fundamentals are all wrong. Her stance wasn't wrong, it was textbook, but he wanted her off balance. He wanted her second-guessing. 10 seconds, he barked. In the field, hesitation gets your team killed. The countdown cut into her concentration, pressure that wasn't pressure at all except when layered with his voice. She took the shot. The round sailed wide. Laughter erupted instantly. His laugh was the loudest, sharp and cruel. Guess quotas don't improve aim. Blackwood nodded once, satisfied. Some people just aren't built for precision. Froze, not at the miss, she could recover from that, but at the clarity of the trap, the deliberate push, the sabotage. She stayed prone, hands steadying against the rifle. She pulled off her cap, letting the rain soak her hair, letting the cool air hit the scar along her temple, a scar hidden until now. The laughter quieted, curiosity edging in. Her breath found rhythm. 4 seconds in, hold, 4 out, hold. The world narrowed, the storm fatting until only the target remained. The next shot cracked, steel pinged, dead center at 400 meters. A murmur rippled. She cycled the bolt, aligned again. 500, another shot, another perfect hit splitting the first. Silence now, Evan's grin faltered. 600, 700, each shot cutting into the target with surgical precision. By the time she reached 800, the wind was at its worst. Flags whipped, gusts unpredictable. She adjusted almost by instinct, body aligned not to what was but to what would be. The trigger broke, the target center disintegrated. And then nothing, just rain, just silence. Blackwood's clipboard lowered, his face drained of color. "Your daughter," he said, voice barely audible. "Sergeant Major Devon." The name cracked through the air like thunder. Even those who didn't know the full story knew enough. A legend, a ghost among snipers. Lieutenant stepped forward, nodding once. Not just his daughter, Staff Sergeant, Silver Star, Operation, 3-day overwatch without movement. Record elimination at 1780 meters. Gasped murmurs, shifting feet. Talon's jaw slackened, his earlier laughter evaporating. He had mocked someone who had already lived the missions they all trained to imagine. Blackwood's voice stuttered, but her file, her record, handed him a folder, rain dripping down the cover. The full file, Sergeant, the one you should have received, unless, of course, you weren't looking. Rose slowly, securing her rifle with the same methodical care she gave everything. She met Blackwood's eyes, steady and cold. I didn't come here for special treatment. I came to make sure everyone gets equal treatment. Her voice carried not loud, not sharp, but final. Swallowed hard, straightened, the other recruits shifted, their earlier smirks replaced with something else. Shame, respect, reflection. Blackwood stood frozen, for once silent. And in the silence, the truth spoke louder than any bullet. How quickly could a room full of voices turn to silence? When the final bullet shattered the bullseye, that silence was instant. Rain pattered against the tin range roof, wind tore across the field, but no one spoke. Every recruit stared as if they hadn't just witnessed a shot, but a truth, undeniable, unarguable, final. Blackwood stood frozen, clipboard hanging slack in his hand, his face drained of the smug certainty that had defined him since the first moment she stepped onto his range. "Your daughter," he had muttered, barely audible. The name spread through the ranks like an electrical current. Devon, a legend whispered in sniper circles, a man whose shots rewrote training manuals, a man who had trained instructors like Blackwood himself. And now his daughter, his legacy, stood in the rain, rifle steady, eyes unflinching. Lieutenant broke the silence, his tone controlled but deliberate. Not just his daughter, Staff Sergeant, Silver Star recipient, Operation. Even who had laughed loudest was quiet now. His bravado cracked, leaving him staring as if the earth beneath him had shifted. Blackwood's voice faltered, scraping for ground that no longer existed. Her file didn't. Produced a folder from beneath his rain-slick coat, handing it over. Her full record, the one you should have reviewed, unless you weren't looking. The words carried weight, more than accusation. They were a spotlight, and in its beam, Blackwood had nowhere to stand. Secured her rifle with calm precision, every motion deliberate. No triumph, no smirk, no flourish. Just the same steady hands that had dismantled rifles and stripped obstacles since the first day. She met Blackwood's eyes, her voice level, cutting through the rain. "I didn't come here for special treatment, Sergeant. I came to make sure everyone gets equal treatment." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't sharp, but it cut deeper than anything she could have yelled. The recruits shifted uncomfortably, their earlier mockery now hanging heavy in the air. Stood, something like pride in his eyes, swallowed hard, unable to form words. And Blackwood looked at her as if for the first time. Not as a candidate to be broken, but as a mirror reflecting every flaw in his methods. His voice snapped the moment back to order. "Colonel wants to see all of us, now." The walk to the administration building felt heavier than the 10-mile hike. Blackwood's boots struck the ground with rigid discipline, but his shoulders were tense. The recruits trailed behind, whispering quietly, the rain masking their unease. Walked among them, silent, her rifle case at her side, her expression unreadable. Inside Colonel's office, the air was different. Still, ordered. The walls bore commendations, maps, photographs of operations none of the recruits would ever hear about outside these halls. The colonel himself sat behind a mahogany desk, his presence commanding without raising a single note of his voice. "Sit," he instructed, and took chairs. Blackwood remained standing, stiff at attention, jaw tight. "I've reviewed the preliminary findings," began, sliding a file open on his desk. "Disturbing, very disturbing." Blackwood swallowed hard but said nothing. 6 qualified female candidates failed out of your program in the last 3 years, continued. All scored in the top percentile on entrance assessments. All failed under your evaluation, Sergeant. Do you know what that looks like? Blackwood's voice finally cracked the silence. Sir, It looks like systematic bias, cut in sharply. He turned to, your assessment, Staff Sergeant. Met his gaze evenly. Her tone was calm, professional. Direct and indirect bias, sir. Candidates subjected to inconsistent standards, targeted disruptions during assessments, and disproportionate criticism compared to male counterparts. This morning's range test is one example. Deliberate distraction. Time pressure imposed only on me. Immediate dismissal of performance without consistent review. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply laid out facts precise as a sniper's shot. Added quietly, similar patterns with Santiago and Washington last week. Both nearly failed under Blackwood's subjective calls. Leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing at Blackwood. And your explanation, Sergeant. Blackwood's face flushed, his words clipped. My methods maintain the highest standards, sir. No, replied firmly, voice low but cutting. You maintain your preferred standards. There's a difference. The silence after was suffocating. Blackwood's posture faltered slightly, shoulders sagging under the weight of what wasn't said. His career, his authority, his legacy slipping away. Closed the file, setting his glasses on top of it with deliberate care. Effective immediately, Lieutenant assumes primary instructional duties. Staff Sergeant will serve as technical advisor and co-instructor. All evaluations will be conducted under dual authority, with standardized metrics. Blackwood's jaw worked, but he gave no protest, not aloud. The colonel's decision was final. As they left the office, the storm outside had eased. The recruits waited in formation, tension thick in the damp air. When stepped into view, their eyes followed, some ashamed, some respectful, none dismissive, not anymore. Broke formation first, stepping toward her, shoulders tight. His voice was lower than it had ever been. Staff Sergeant, I want to apologize. My comments before, they were out of line. Studied him, her face unreadable. Were they out of line because you were wrong, or because you assumed I was someone different? The question hit him harder than any reprimand. His mouth opened, then closed. No answer, not yet. Something to think about, she added quietly, securing her gear. Moved beside her as they walked back toward the barracks. His voice carried something lighter. For what it's worth, I figured you had to be something special. Just didn't realize how special. Shook her head. Everyone here has potential. It doesn't look the same on everyone. That doesn't make it less real. The words hung between them, soft but sharp. By the time she returned to her quarters that night, the photo on her nightstand caught her eye again. She picked it up, studying the faded edges. A younger, silver star pinned to her chest, her father standing beside her, proud and certain. The memory was still sharp, his hand on her shoulder, his words steady. Excellence doesn't ask permission to exist, it just does. She placed the photo back down, exhaled, and lay on her bunk. Tomorrow would not be easier. Tomorrow nothing would be forgiven. But tomorrow she would still be here. And for now, that was enough. Why was silence sometimes heavier than noise? When training resumed the next morning, it wasn't the same. The recruits lined up as they always had, but the atmosphere had shifted. They stood, less smirking, more aware. Eyes darted toward her with something new, respect mingled with unease. Felt it pressing against her shoulders. Not admiration. Not yet. Something closer to wariness, as though they weren't sure how to treat her now that they knew who she was. Lieutenant stood at the front, clipboard in hand. Blackwood lingered off to the side, posture rigid, stripped of the casual authority he once wielded so easily. His arms were crossed, but his words didn't carry. Not anymore. His voice was calm, steady. The structure of this course is changing. From this point forward, assessments will be standardized. Metrics will be clear, measurable, and applied to everyone equally. He glanced toward. She stood just behind him, hands at her sides, expression unreadable. Staff Sergeant will provide technical instruction, continued. You will treat her with the respect due her rank and her record. Understood. The reply was uneven. Yes, sir. Not shouted, not sharp, just words, but caught the hesitation, the flickers of pride still stinging. Change didn't come with a single order. It came slowly, like rain carving stone. That afternoon, the range felt different too. No jeers when she took her place. No whispered bets about when she would fail. Instead, eyes followed every adjustment she made, every calculation she muttered under her breath. Was the first to break the barrier. Staff Sergeant, he said quietly as she checked her rifle, can you watch my grouping? I'm pulling left. She nodded once, lay prone beside him and studied his position. Your breathing cycle's off. You're exhaling mid-trigger pull. He frowned, trying again. She timed his breath against the squeeze. The shot cracked closer to center. Better, she said simply. He nodded, absorbing it. No jokes, no bravado, just learning. The others watched, even though he kept his distance. Hours later, as the rain lightened and the recruits packed up, lingered. He adjusted his rifle strap, pretending not to look at her until finally he muttered, You noticed my pull yesterday. Right side, third shot. Turned, studying him. Your stance loads your shoulder, weight's uneven. That tension pushes your barrel right. He hesitated, then cautiously, show me. She moved beside him, adjusted his elbow, shifted his grip. Distribute weight through your core, not your shoulder. Let the rifle settle with you, not against you. He tested the position, fired. The round struck closer to center than before, his brow furrowed, surprised. That feels different, he admitted. Stable, she corrected. You're not fighting yourself anymore. For the first time since their arrival, didn't smirk. He just nodded quietly, as though the arrogance had cracked. By the end of the week, the change was visible. Recruits who had once snickered now sought her quiet corrections. Santiago, once on the verge of washing out, flourished under her guidance. Washington, dismissed by Blackwood as unsteady, discovered a natural rhythm with breathing and trigger control. Even though he fought pride every step of the way, returned for subtle adjustments, his earlier sneers replaced with hesitant curiosity. Blackwood watched from the sidelines, jaw tight, arms crossed. His authority, once unquestioned, was unraveling. Each correction she gave, each improvement they made, cut deeper into the fabric of his command. And yet, one afternoon, he stepped forward. A female recruit struggled with rifle stability, her arms shaking under the weight. Blackwood knelt beside her, his voice stripped of its usual edge. It's not about strength, he said, his tone measured. It's alignment, breath control, discipline. They were her words, words she had spoken days earlier, now echoed from his mouth. The recruit adjusted, fired, a tight grouping. Blackwood nodded once, better. Watched silently. She felt no triumph, only something quieter. Change, reluctant and halting, but change nonetheless. That evening approached her with a tablet in hand. Performance metrics are up. Washington, Santiago, even. They're improving across the board. Wiped her rifle, her motions methodical. They always had the ability, they just weren't seen. Studied her a moment. That's the difference, you see what others miss. She didn't answer, she just cleaned, each stroke precise. Later, alone in her quarters, she sat on the edge of the bed. The photo on her nightstand caught her eye again, her father beside her, the silver star bright against her uniform. She remembered his voice. Hold everyone to the same high standard. No exceptions, but no predetermined failures either. Her chest tightened. Was she living that? Or was she becoming something else? An avenger, a symbol instead of just a soldier? She rubbed her scar absently, the rain outside whispering against the window. She didn't want to be remembered as her father's daughter. She wanted to be remembered as herself. But would that ever be enough? The next day, as recruits filed onto the range, she caught watching her again. Not with challenge, not with disdain, but with something quieter, respect maybe, or curiosity. He approached, rifle slung over his shoulder. "I've been reading up. Operation, 94 hours without movement." Said nothing, simply adjusted her rifle on the table. "How?" he asked finally. "How do you not move for 4 days?" She looked at him, her expression steady. "Training, discipline, knowing that discomfort is temporary, mission failure is." He absorbed the words, nodding slowly. His cocky grin didn't return. For the first time she believed he was listening, really listening. The storm clouds above the range broke for a brief moment, sunlight cutting through the gray. The light struck the steel targets at the far end, glinting bright against the mud. For a moment everything was still. Closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She knew the silence wouldn't last. Challenges always returned. Doubt always crept back in. But for now there was progress. For now there was change. And for now she was still here. Still standing. Still proving, not with words, but with precision. With truth. Why did recognition sometimes feel heavier than ridicule? 2 weeks into the restructured course, the recruits were no longer the same men and women who had stepped off the transport truck. Their uniforms were still soaked with sweat, their hands still calloused from hours on the range, but the atmosphere had shifted. Less arrogance, less mockery, more focus. The change wasn't loud, it was subtle, a silence filled with discipline instead of disdain. Felt it every morning as they lined up. The recruits no longer smirked when she adjusted her rifle, no longer fell quiet in the mess hall when she entered. Instead, they watched her closely, not for failure but for instruction, for something they could carry into their own shots, their own survival. She hadn't expected that weight. On the range, Santiago adjusted his scope, brows furrowed. "Staff Sergeant, I'm struggling with wind drift calculations past 700. My math doesn't match the impact." Knelt beside him, studying the sheet of scribbled formulas. She traced one number with her finger. "You're calculating static wind. Out here, gusts shift mid-flight. Think of it as a moving equation. Recalculate halfway." His eyes widened. "Mid-flight. Your mind is as much a tool as your rifle. Trust both." He tried again, adjusting firing. The round pinged off steel. He looked up, astonished, and for the first time his confidence bloomed. Gave a small nod. "Your strength isn't your trigger finger, it's your math. Use it." Nearby, Washington lay prone, steadying his breath. His shoulders shook with nerves each time he exhaled. Crouched low, her voice calm. "You're holding too long. Let the breath move you, don't fight it." He tried again. Inhale, exhale, squeeze. The round struck center. His grin cracked through the mud in exhaustion. I hit it." "You always could," she replied softly. Word spread. Washington and Santiago, once dismissed as weak, were now examples. The others took notice. The class was no longer competing to humiliate, it was competing to improve. Even. He still carried his pride like a shield, but he came to her with questions now. Subtle, almost begrudging, but questions nonetheless. One afternoon he stood beside her, jaw tight. "I've never been corrected the way you corrected me, not even by instructors at Bennying. They just let me keep pulling right." Adjusted her rifle strap. Sometimes people don't see what doesn't fit their picture, doesn't mean it's not there. He frowned. "Why didn't you call me out harder? I earned it." Her eyes met his, steady. A good sniper doesn't waste a bullet when a shift in wind will do. He blinked, then smirked faintly, without arrogance, without mockery, just acknowledgement. But progress wasn't without tension. Blackwood lingered at the edges of training, silent but present. His posture was rigid, his authority diminished, but his eyes followed everything. Watching the recruits, watching his own legacy slip through his fingers. One evening caught him kneeling beside a female recruit whose arms trembled under the rifle's weight. His tone was measured, almost soft. "Strength isn't about muscles here. It's about alignment, breath control. Let the rifle balance with you. The recruit adjusted, fired a tight grouping. Stood a distance away, watching. He glanced up, caught her eyes. For a flicker of a moment, something passed between them. Not apology, not even respect, but recognition that he was learning too. It unsettled her more than his scorn ever had. That night back in her quarters, she unpacked her rifle for cleaning. Her hands moved automatically, each part laid out with precision. But her thoughts lingered on the photograph beside her bed, her father's hand on her shoulder, his smile proud but firm. She whispered into the empty room, "You told me to show them nothing until it was time. But what happens after I show them? What am I then?" The silence didn't answer. The next day, Colonel arrived at the range. His presence was felt before he spoke, the recruits straightening, the instructors snapping to. He stood beside as the recruits fired, his eyes following each shot, each adjustment. "Impressive progress," he said finally. "Washington and Santiago were nearly gone under Blackwood. Now they're steady." "They needed adjustments, not dismissal," replied. "Washington has breath control most don't notice. Santiago calculates faster than anyone I've seen. Different strengths, same value." Nodded. "That's the philosophy your father lived by. I see it lives on." The words tightened something in her chest. She didn't want to be remembered just as his daughter. She wanted to stand as herself. But could she, when every achievement was weighed against his shadow? That evening caught up with her on the walk back to barracks. His voice was easy, but his eyes serious. "You know, you've changed things. People look at each other differently now. Look at themselves differently." Shook her head. "It's not me. It's the truth they couldn't see before." Still, said with a small smile, truth needed a voice, or in your case, a trigger pull. She didn't smile back. Not yet. The weight was still heavy. Recognition, respect, it wasn't freedom. It was another burden. That night, she packed her rifle case with careful precision, her fingers brushing the engraving etched into the steel after operation. Truth finds its mark. She paused, staring at the words. Truth had found its mark at Fort. But at what cost to her? Why did change always come slower than the truth that demanded it? By the fourth week, the recruits no longer carried themselves like individuals competing for survival. They moved like a unit. Their rivalry had not disappeared. It had sharpened into something cleaner, less poisonous. Now it was iron sharpening iron. Watched it unfold from the firing line. Washington, once shaky with nerves, guided another recruit through breath control. Santiago scribbled ballistic calculations not only for himself, but for anyone struggling. Even, whose arrogance once filled every silence, corrected a younger recruit's stance with quiet patience. The transformation was visible in the numbers, too. Accuracy rates climbed. Endurance tests showed fewer failures. For the first time in years, the program wasn't shrinking by attrition, it was building by strength. And everyone knew why. Saw it most clearly. He stood beside one morning, clipboard tucked under his arm, watching as Santiago nailed a 700-meter target on his first attempt. "This class was weeks from collapsing," he said. "Now it's the strongest we've had in 5 years." Adjusted the spotting scope, her tone even. They always had it, they just needed someone to notice. Glanced at her. "You see what others miss, that's the difference." She didn't reply. She kept her eye on the glass, watching Santiago cycle the bolt, line up again, fire. Another ping, another perfect grouping. Behind them, Blackwood hovered. His posture was still rigid, but the edge in his presence had dulled. He no longer barked unsolicited corrections. He no longer prowled for failure. Instead, he lingered like a shadow unsure of its own shape. That afternoon saw him kneeling beside a female recruit, his voice low, even measured. "Keep the stock in line with your spine, not your shoulder. That way recoil works with you, not against you." The recruit adjusted, fired, struck center. Blackwood nodded once. "Better." Watched from a distance. It unsettled her more than his contempt had, because it meant he was learning, changing, maybe not by choice but by necessity. And that raised the question she couldn't silence. If even Blackwood could change, what excuse did anyone else have for refusing? That evening, Colonel arrived unannounced at the range. His presence pulled the recruits, their conversations hushed. He watched in silence for nearly an hour as they cycled through advanced drills, his hands clasped behind his back. Finally he turned to, "Impressive. Washington, Santiago, they would have washed out before. Now they're thriving." "They needed technical adjustments," she replied. "Not dismissal. Their strengths didn't fit Blackwood's definition, but that doesn't make them less valuable." Nodded slowly. "That's what your father always believed. The right sniper is not always the obvious one." The words cut deeper than he intended. His throat tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. She didn't want to be measured against her father, even in praise. She wanted to be herself. The colonel studied her a moment longer, then spoke with deliberate weight. "Fort has requested assistance with their sniper program. Similar problems, different faces. They asked for you by name." The words landed like a shot she hadn't braced for. She masked her reaction, but her mind spun. Another assignment, another program, another fight to prove what should never have been in question. "When?" she asked quietly. 3 weeks, after this class reaches mid-course qualifications." Nodded once, though inside she felt the familiar churn, the pull between staying and leaving, between finishing what she had started here and carrying it further. That night, alone in her quarters, she packed and repacked her gear in silence. Her fingers brushed the photograph of her Silver Star ceremony again, her father's hand on her shoulder, his smile proud and unyielding. She whispered into the still air, "How many ranges, Dad? How many times do I prove the same truth before it finally stays?" No answer came, only the rain against the window, steady and cold. The next morning the recruits gathered again, unaware of the decision hanging in the air. Took his place on the line, his jaw set, his rifle steady. When he fired, his shot landed close to center than ever before. He glanced at, almost instinctively, waiting for her judgment. She gave the slightest nod. His eyes shifted, something like respect, real, unguarded, settling there for the first time. Change was slow, but it was happening. And knew that when she left, the real test would begin, not for her but for them. Whether they would carry what they had learned, or let it wash away like footprints in rain. Why was leaving sometimes harder than enduring? 6 weeks after first arrived at Fort, the range looked different. The steel targets still stretched across the mud. The wind still snapped the flags. The barracks still smelled faintly of oil and rain. But the people, they were different. A new group of recruits stood in formation. 24 again. Among them, 3 women. A number small on paper but larger than anything had seen in nearly a decade. Their eyes were sharp, wary, aware of what awaited them. Stood at the front, not as a candidate anymore, but in an instructor's uniform. The change felt heavier than she expected. It wasn't triumph, it was responsibility. Beside her, Lieutenant read from the clipboard, his voice even. "This program has been restructured. Every evaluation will be standardized. Every recruit will be judged by the same clear, measurable criteria. Staff Sergeant will oversee technical instruction." He paused, letting the words settle. Then he added, "And Sergeant Blackwood remains as instructor. His role has changed, but his experience stands. Listen, learn, and prove." The recruits responded in unison, "Yes, sir." His eyes flicked sideways to Blackwood. His shoulders were stiff, his expression guarded. But when he stepped forward to address the recruits, his words were different than they would have been weeks ago. "Standards here don't care about your background, your gender, or your excuses," he said. His tone still carried steel, but it lacked the poison it once had. "Excellence is the only language. Learn it." It wasn't perfect, it wasn't redemption, but it was different. and sometimes different was enough. That afternoon, the recruits cycled through their first range session. A young woman at the far end struggled with rifle stability, her arms shaking under the weight. In the past, Blackwood might have dismissed her, barked about biology, declared her unfit before she had a chance to correct herself. But this time he knelt beside her. His voice was low, almost careful. Proper form isn't about strength, it's about alignment. Let the rifle rest with you, not against you. She adjusted, fired. A tight grouping appeared on the target. Blackwood nodded once, better. Watch from a distance, arms folded, expression neutral. She didn't smile, but inside something shifted. Not victory, not vindication, just proof that even the most stubborn could learn when truth refused to be silenced. Later that evening, approached her with a tablet. Graduation statistics from the last class. Highest completion rate in 5 years. Strongest diversity numbers in program history. Scan the data without speaking. Numbers on a screen, proof of change. The commander is impressed, added. Fort confirmed your assignment. They're eager to implement what you've built here. Nodded once, setting the tablet aside. When do I leave? 3 days. 3 days. Just long enough to see this group through their first qualification. That night she sat alone in her quarters, methodically packing her gear. Every item had its place. Every piece of equipment was folded, secured, tucked away with precision. She paused when her fingers brushed against 2 photographs. One, the older, her Silver Star ceremony, her father's hand heavy on her shoulder. The other, newer, taken just days ago. With her class of recruits, Washington and Santiago grinning wide, standing tall, even visible in the back row, pride tucked behind restraint. She set both photos on the nightstand, side by side, past and present, legacy and change. A memory surfaced unbidden, her younger self, lying prone in the mud of their family's land, rain pounding her face. She had asked her father, "Why can't we wait until the storm stops?" He had adjusted her stance, voice calm and certain. Because excellence doesn't ask permission to exist, it persists, rain or shine. That lesson had carried her through every battlefield, every test, every glance of doubt. It carried her still. She exhaled slowly, returning the photographs to her pack. In 3 days, she would leave Fort, and the truth she had carried here would have to stand on its own. The next morning, the recruits assembled again. Rain swept the field in gusts, mud clinging to boots. The air smelled of challenge. Stood before them, rifle case at her side, eyes scanning the line. She didn't tell them about her father. She didn't tell them about her Silver Star, or operation, or the scar hidden beneath her hairline. She only told them this. Excellence doesn't ask permission to exist. It just does. Out here, it doesn't matter who you are when you walk in. It matters who you are when you line up on the rifle. That's what we'll find out together. Their faces were young, uncertain but hungry. The kind of hunger that could carve history. Why was leaving always the truest test of what you'd built? The sun rose pale over Fort on her last morning there. The mist clung to the tree line, the air sharp with autumn bite. Recruits filed into formation, their uniforms damp with dew, their faces taut with discipline. Stood at the front, not as an outsider anymore, but as an instructor whose presence had changed the course of their training. She didn't speak right away. She let the silence stretch, the sound of boots shifting on gravel, the faint clatter of rifles settling against shoulders. She watched their eyes, harder now, clearer than they'd been when they first arrived. 3 weeks ago, some of them had smirked when she missed a shot. Some had laughed when Blackwood pressed her to fail. Now those same faces stood, waiting, not for her failure but for her guidance. The difference was subtle, but it was everything. Stepped forward with his clipboard. Mid-course qualification today. 5 distances, 400 through 800 meters. Standard scoring. Minimum average grouping under 4 inches. The recruits nodded, No jokes, no jeers, just quiet determination. Watched as Washington stepped to the line. His breath came steady now, no tremor in his shoulders. He exhaled, squeezed, fired. Ping. A center strike. Another. Another. By the time he finished his sequence, his grouping was so tight it could have been drawn by compass. He looked back instinctively, eyes searching for her. Gave a small nod. He stood taller. Next came Santiago. His calculations flew across his notepad, pencil scratching, as if he were solving a riddle faster than it could be spoken. He fired with mathematical certainty, each round finding its place as if numbers themselves had guided the trajectory. Felt something warm rise in her chest, pride, not for herself but for them. Then his movements were sharper now, stripped of the arrogance that once poisoned every step. He set his stance carefully, distributed weight through his core just as she had taught him. His first shot struck steel, second followed, grouping steady. By the end of his run, he exhaled and lowered the rifle, the faintest of smiles breaking through his hardened jaw. He didn't look at the target, he looked at her. And she knew he wasn't seeking validation, he was acknowledging a debt. By the end of the exercise, the class had outperformed every rotation in recent memory. Their groupings, their endurance higher, their failure rates nearly erased. Tallied scores, his brows rising. Highest mid-course pass rate in a decade. The recruits murmured with pride but stayed still, hands folded behind her back. She let the moment belong to them. Because it did. Later that day, she walked the gravel path back to her quarters for the last time. Her duffel was already packed, her rifle case secured. 2 photographs rested inside. One of her Silver Star ceremony, her father's hand on her shoulder, the other of her with this class, their faces marked by mud, exhaustion, and quiet pride. She closed the case with finality. A knock came at her door. Stood there, his expression awkward, as if the words he wanted to say had been rehearsed and still didn't feel right. "Staff Sergeant," he began, voice lower than she had ever heard it. "When I laughed at you that first day, I thought you were here to prove something impossible. I thought you didn't belong, but you were proving something I didn't even see, that I wasn't looking far enough." Studied him for a long moment. She could have dismissed him. She could have reminded him of every word, every smirk. Instead, she asked quietly, "Are you looking now?" His jaw tightened, then he nodded. "Yeah, I am." She gave a small nod in return. "Then don't waste it." He exhaled as if relieved. "Good luck at." When he left, the silence in the room deepened. That evening, walked with her to the transport truck idling at the edge of the range. The recruits were still on the firing line, their shots echoing across the damp field. Rain threatened again, clouds heavy overhead. Spoke as they walked. "You've changed this place. Whatever happens hereafter, it won't go back to what it was." Adjusted her duffel on her shoulder. "Change isn't about me, it's about them. If they carry it, it lasts. If they don't, it ends." His eyes lingered on her, thoughtful. "You sound like your father." Her steps slowed, then resumed. She didn't answer. At the truck, she turned once, watching the range, adjusting another recruit's stance. Washington timing his breathing with precision. Santiago scribbling calculations for 2 others. The sound of their rifles cracked through the air, sharp and certain. Let herself absorb it, not as triumph, not as victory, but as proof. She climbed into the truck, her rifle case secure at her side. As the engine roared to life, she looked once more at the range fatting behind her. The storm clouds finally broke, sunlight cutting through for a brief, fleeting moment, striking the steel targets in a blaze of silver. She remembered her father's words long ago in the rain. Excellence doesn't ask permission to exist, it persists. And she understood now. She didn't need to argue, she didn't need to shout. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.